is how environmental rights can be used to fight pollution and hold governments and corporations accountable. The second is really to showcase the work of local community activists and how they are fighting pollution in their own communities. And the third is really to explore advocacy strategies and scaling opportunities to really bring environmental justice to the national and international stage in a way that really elevates the on-the-ground experiences of these activists. So before, as I said before, we're going to be discussing pollution and environmental rights. Environmental rights are internationally recognized human rights, typically used to describe the right to access information, public participation, and the right to justice. These rights are really critical when you're speaking about pollution. Pollution is not just some unavoidable consequence to economic development. It really also has become an urgent environmental injustice. Pollution is the largest cause of disease, death, and disability in the world today, killing more people than AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria combined. It costs the world's economy close to $5 trillion every year. What's also clear is that exposure and the impacts of pollution are not felt equally. Over 90% of these deaths occur in low and middle income countries. Essentially, it means that it's poor and vulnerable and minority communities that are facing the brunt of the problem. Around the world, these communities are facing environmental harm, public health issues, loss of their livelihoods, and of course, degradation to their cultural and historic lands. This is all despite the fact that well over 150 countries recognize the right to a clean and healthy environment in their constitutions, in their laws, and in their agreements. What does this mean? It means that governments are failing to enforce pollution laws, regulations, and standards. They're not providing people with the access to the information that they need, that they're legally required to give to their people. As well as really, even when people do get access to their information, they rarely get to have a voice in local decision-making about issues that are directly affecting their lives. We think that environmental rights can be a strategic tool that can help address this problem. For the past 9 years, WRI has been working with our Access Initiative partners in 6 different countries on the STRIPE project. STRIPE stands for Strengthening the Right to Information for People and the Environment. It is a long-term strategy for using environmental rights to fight pollution. We work with partners on the ground and with civil society in these 6 countries: Indonesia, Mongolia, Thailand, Jamaica, Morocco, and Tunisia, to use their right to information and public participation to fight environmental justice, demand better compliance of environmental laws, and build a pollution accountability movement that really ensures evidence-based advocacy is supporting local communities. I'm very excited to announce that we have synthesized all our learnings from these past years and have outlined our methodology in a new toolkit that we are launching today as part of this webinar. You can see the link to access it in the bottom of your screen, as well as in the Q&A chat that you will be able to use to ask questions throughout this entire webinar. By transforming environmental rights into a concrete strategy, we hope it will really help local communities and civil society help overcome the environmental injustice that's associated with pollution. As one environmental advocate from the US said, we are fighting a global challenge, one community at a time. With that, we've put together this video to tell you more.
Ада гэдэг компани байна. Хүний нэгэн сайхан налгар өдөр гинтхэн 50 тонны машинуудтай 5-6 машинуудтай ирж энэ хөндийг шороогоор ингээд буулаад замын дэгшилж ирсэн.
Тэгээ ингээд үндэсний бахархал болсон соёлын өв маань устгагдаад хөржээ. Энэ тал дээр бол үнэхээр эмнэлтэд эмзэглэж байгаа учраас манай Эрдэнэ цагаан сумын ард иргэд маш их бухимдалтай нуул ухаан эсрэг тэмцэж байгаа. Тэмцээр байгаа.
50 метр гэж ярьж байгаа. Одоо тэр гол тулгаар зам зассан. Одоо тэр голын 50 метр талаасаа ингээд түрээд явж байгаа шүү дээ. Энд үйл ажиллагаа явагдчихлаа шүү дээ. Энэ олборлолт хийж байгаа хэсгэл 50 руугаа ороогүй болохоос биш үйл ажиллагаа энд яваад л байгаа байхгүй.
Намаа орчуулгын цуурайтай сонсогдоод байх юм. Манайханд ямар вэ?
Irma, if you could just mute yourself, just let me introduce everybody and then we're going to begin. We have a wonderful list of panelists. First, you're going to hear from our Mongolia partners. Chimge Dastorj is the Governance Program Officer for the Open Society Forum of Mongolia and has been coordinating Stripe in that country since 2018. She's an environmental lawyer and member of the Association of Mongolian Advocates. Bayermer Basharan is a civil activist, geography teacher, and founder of Lord of Kosful Lake, dedicated to the protection of that important water resource in central Mongolia. She has been a leader of the Stripe project, focusing her time on supporting local communities across the country. She also is focusing on increasing democracy education, advocating for the protection of human rights and public interest litigation. Baira Nasara is a civil society activist and human rights expert, working to promote litigation of the local community's right to environment and development since 2001. She is head of Steps Without Borders and also an important Stripe project leader. After the Mongolians, we'll move to Indonesia and hear from Margathita Quina. Quina is an Indonesian lawyer. She was the Stripe program manager during her time at the Indonesian Center for Environmental Law. This work allowed her to create and lead an environmental pollution desk at ISO. Now she works with environmental NGOs in Indonesia and legal aid foundations to hold polluters accountable and facilitates partnerships and with international environmental law organizations. After Quina, we will hear from Widya Wishwanathan. She is an environmental and social justice researcher and program director for the Center for Policy Research and Namadi Environmental Justice Program. CPR is one of the leading policy think tanks, a program that's created a network of grassroots legal professions working in the field of environmental law implementation and citizen empowerment across the globe. Alejandra Martin is the senior program officer for land, water, and climate justice at the American Jewish World Service. They're a funding organization that works to realize human rights and end poverty in the developing world. She brings over 15 years of experience working with community grassroots-based organizations, social movements, governments, and corporations, all while advancing the human rights for marginalized people. Finally, after our presentations, we will hear from John Knox as a discussant. John Knox is the Henry C. Lauerman Professor of Environmental Law at Wake Forest University, where he has taught since 2006. Between 2012 and 2018, he first served as a UN expert and then as the first special rapporteur on human rights obligations related to the enjoyment of a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. His mandate culminated in the presentation of the United Nations Framework Principles on Human Rights and the Environment in March 2018. With that, I welcome you to our webinar and hand it over to Chimge. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Liz. Beautiful introduction and then also beautiful video on Mongolia. Today, I just briefly talk about the background context in Mongolia in relation to mining, the negative impacts of mining on the environment and local communities. Next, please. And the next too. So despite the enormous economic contribution, the mining has also brought a number of social and environmental problems in Mongolia. So this graphic shows that, the blue line is the total of disturbed land by mining in all the provinces in Mongolia, and red one illustrates this, like the land that needs to be rehabilitated. Difference between these two colors shows that, how small the environmental rehabilitation done in Mongolia so far. Next, please. So under rivers and natural water sources, like every year, hundreds of natural water sources dried up in Mongolia. Though we cannot say it's all because of mining, the mining is still be considered one of the major regions of disturbance of water sources. Next, please. So in this context, like local herders still engage in nomadic lifestyle, which like a status almost 30% of Mongolian total population, whose livelihood is entirely depend on the pasture land, the natural source of water. So they have been deprived all of the human rights, fundamental rights, especially like right to maintain their livelihood and income source, and right to land, and right to access to the safe drinking water. And most importantly, they are depriving their rights access to information, especially information on the pollution, and then participate in environmental and mining related decision makings, and also therefore access to justice. So, however, there are a number of government organizations with the oversight mandate on the environmental obligation of mining companies. Due to the overlapped mandates and also inconsistency between these organizations, the entire system is not working efficiently in Mongolia. So in this context, STRIDE project started in Mongolia in 2004 with the three main focus. The first one is strengthening the local communities and mobilizing them. And then the second one is assisting the main partners in using visual mapping for the documentation and for the advocacy. And then third one, the advocacy for the better management of the water and increased public participation. And then after the project, Open Society Forum decided to continue these project methodologies and scale up this project into the new communities. So especially we are continuing supporting the communities along the tall river basins in order to sustain the achievements in the prior phases of the project, especially like taking public interest litigation. So what the changes has brought the STRIDE project into these communities will be introduced by our next speakers. Thank you very much.
Lyra, do you want to begin?
За. Би эхлэе. Уртатлын слайдыг гаргахгүй гэж дамжуулаад.
Can you please show the previous slide?
За эхэлж яах вэ?
Shall I start? Shall I start?
Манай байгууллага
Our organization has been working since 2006 on the issues of human rights and environmental rights on the community level, protecting the rights of herders and amplifying the voices of the herders into decision-making panels. The Stripe project, we've worked on the Stripe project in 2018 for 5 months, from June to December. We used Stripe tool. We worked in Aira in Nahbag of Ormagagamag. In this AMAC, we've had lots of we've had the mining that fluorspar mining within 3 kilometers of the radius. They were polluting in 3 kilometers territory, and a total of 120 people were affected by environmental pollution. We have come up with the mapping of the situation, and we have come up with the cadastre. We use the cadastre picture. We use the spatial pictures. We also received information about impacts on health of people and
Next, please.
Animals. We've conducted it for 9 trainings.
Next.
For 124 people. Within the framework of the training, we have filed 11 complaints. We have sent letters and petitions to 23 government agencies. We have met with the leadership of the agencies, the heads, the ministries, government agencies. We have brought the representatives of the Human Rights Commission of Mongolia to the place.
Next, please.
From the state, of course, the Parliament of Mongolia, they have acknowledged that actually it was a place with historical significance, with tangible heritage.
Next, please.
We have managed to
next
make the government, make the Parliament to stop expansion of this area, mining of this area, and the herders have joined the Namhati Asian network, and they were prepared as they were trained as paralegals, and they have became paralegals and established an NGO called Lords of Iraq by the name of that specific location. Mrs. Amakam Bayer, a young herder, she participated in a women defenders meeting in Ireland. She was very inspired with participating in that meeting, and she started a very serious work when she got back home. So we've worked for just 6 months, but we could reach very tangible effects with the Stripe project. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Irma, please continue.
За баярлалаа. Shall I start?
Yes.
The Lord of the Hoofschool Lake movement, it's actually an NGO. We have started working on Stripe projects in 2014. And the Stripe project was directed at empowering local citizens. We chose 2 locations in Tuam, where the mining has actually impacted the environmental rights of the communities. And one more location where a lot of health impact was detected because of the mining. People started having asthmas and had various health implications. So we have empowered the local communities on how to get environmental information, how citizens and communities can impact the state decisions, and all of these methodologies were taught to the communities, were referred to the communities, worked with journalists as well, in media, local media, and in 4 years we've conducted much of advocacy. As a result, the situation with the pollution of the Troll River have reached the attention not only of the Mongolian government, but of the United Nations. As a result, from bugs and from even from the Parliament of Mongolia, many decisions came out as a result of this advocacy. Out of these 4 years of work, 4 more NGOs were formed that worked on protection of the river. And as a result, the communities became skillful in working as a team, in partnering with the state, in monitoring the situation, and in participating in decision making. So all of these methods of participation of decision making were illustrated through these comics that we call the story of Tsitske. It became a very good case, a good example for others. Now we have filed a litigation claim to the court. We have
Next, please.
A public to pay coalition, and for 7 years we've been working on these cases. 96 licenses were withdrawn, and
Next, please.
3 times in 3 litigation cases were opened, and we have criticized the situation when the company was fined for polluting the rivers. And we have also managed to nullify the 7 billion tons of fines that were
Next, please.
that were asked from 80,000 owners. So there were many effective results from these years of working with the Stripe tools.
Great. Thank you so much, Bayirma, Byra, and Chimge. They really are not able in the short time we have to reflect all of the amazing work that they and outcomes that they've really been able to accomplish in Mongolia, including really helping to strengthen national coalitions to advocate for better compliance and enforcement of mining and water laws across the country. With that, I will move to our next speaker, Quina, and hear a little bit about how we worked in Indonesia with the Stripe project. Quina, over to you.
Sure. Thanks so much, Liz, for having me here. It's really nice to hear all the Mongolians' achievements. It makes me feel quite intimidated, really. My first exposure with Stripe was 47, 8 years ago. And it was really a good time, if I recall it and compare it with the situation right now. Because here in Indonesia, we're having a changing political and legal landscape. And our Congress recently passed a really controversial job creation law. It's actually really frustrating to see the tools that's been really critical for our advocacy being taken away from us, including some really critical participation opportunities in environmental decision making. So it feels really timely for me to reflect back to our Stripe experience and the methodology really, and how it could help us in continuing the fight with all these limitations and changing landscape. So one thing about Stripe that that I think everyone needs to really understand is it is a methodology, and it's a really good methodology. Really, it's carefully taking into account all of the scientific information, and it helps you to figure out which information you really need to obtain to help you build the perception of the kind of pollution event in front of you. So Stripe really allow you to locate the most critical information pieces to understand the complicated facts related to a pollution incident. In our case in Indonesia, years ago, it allows the people along the banks of a river called Ciujung, who are dependent to the river's water, to locate the pollution, to the polluters most responsible for the water pollution right there that has been occurring more than 15 years. So this is a situation where locals are pretty hesitant. They've losing their faith in the law, in the law enforcement institution, and having the tool that allows them to really understand what are the enforcement efforts that has been taken, who are the polluters, really allowing the community to push the government to carry out more strategic actions. For example, in our case, it was an environmental audit that lays out who the polluters are. And it also allows government to enforce against polluters. It also allows discussion to revive the community's hope, which is really important for long occurring pollution events, kind of like 10 years, 15 years of pollution. And we've been using this approach as well, this methodology, in a number of other cases. And in fact, the access to information has been at the heart of some other river cases, even the Jakarta Air case, if you ever seen that somewhere in the news. It's really, really, really dependent on information forcing tool, which is really at the heart of Stripe, giving you a fresh lens to old chronic pollution cases. And my favorite part about Stripe is its focus. It's really focusing on the things that are really critical for us, the water and the air, the abandoned public goods that not everybody can see. And yeah, in short, it really helps you to perceive how the event has been handled before and how you could determine new strategies, including helping you to understand what are the limits of the legal instruments that you are using. However, Stripe does not teach you substantive knowledge of the air pollution and water pollution rules in your countries. This is really something that all local advocates need to learn on their own. It doesn't also tells you about the science of water and air quality management. It gives an overall overview, but still advocates need to do their learning themselves. It's also not a legal strategy, so having information, you still have to use that, really use that to discuss what is the most appropriate legal strategy for you. It's not a community organizing tool, and it requires translating complicated information to the forms most relevant for the communities. And in doing that, I learned the hard way that you need to really, really work for the community and listen to their voice, listen to their ideas, instead of kind of like forcing your own biases about what is the information forms that is really accessible for them. So yeah, the world for the environmental justice in Indonesia will be much more challenging. We've seen extractives boom, now we're seeing industrial boom, and the impacts is presumably going to be maybe 10 years from now, but it's really nice. I'm really thankful to have a methodology that allows the advocates in Indonesia to play smarter.
Great. Thank you so much, Krina. I hope that we can get to, during the discussion portion of the webinar, to talk more about two really important issues you raised, both how to ensure that we're supporting local communities' ability to lead and really achieve the results that they want, as well as sort of the realities of the political context and how that impacts pollution and the limits of what we can really do with environmental rights. So thank you for that. Next up, we're going to hear from Widya. So Widya, please take it away.
Thank you so much. I would like to just congratulate to all the speakers who spoke before me, friends from Mongolia and Indonesia. I think our contexts are so similar. The fights are so similar, and I'm so motivated to hear you guys putting up a great fight in this long-standing crusade. So basically, I just wanted to introduce Environmental Justice Program in India, which is a collaborative program between Center for Policy Research and Namati. This program brings together the strengths of paralegal work and policy research together. And before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that our work is an outcome of collective efforts and combined vision of so many brilliant people here in India and the US. And I just happen to be the voice here today. So just wanted to acknowledge that. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just to give you guys a context, India has been pursuing aggressive economic policy since 1990s, steered towards economic growth. It's even touted to be one of the most emerging economies, which at least pre-COVID was also aspiring to become a 5 trillion economy, outpacing many developed economies. And this growth-oriented agenda has essentially pushed for large-scale industrialization, mega infrastructure projects, and many mining projects across the length and breadth of the country. This deliberate push, next slide. I think this deliberate push for newer and bigger projects in the name of economic growth is not only is only intensifying the pressure on our dilapidated ecosystem, which is already reeling under the impacts of unregulated operational projects in the country. Most of these projects are regulated by a web of comprehensive environmental regulations, which are meant to minimize the environmental and social impacts of these projects. But if you look closer at the ground situation, you'll see these regulations are poorly enforced, leading to large section of vulnerable communities bear disproportional burden of the psychological cost. This problem is not new. There have been numerous studies and even a government audit report which has damning evidence of how rampant the issue of non-compliance is in our country. You can see these pictures where there is apparently treated water being released into the river, and there is a mountain which is not a natural mountain but an overburdened dump from a mining site which can any day collapse and put so many lives at risk. Next slide, please. So this poor enforcement or non-compliance to regulation is not merely an unchecked box on paper against legal condition. It actually translates into life-altering situations for communities. These communities grapple on a daily basis with environmental impacts which exposes them to toxic contamination, adversely affect their livelihoods, and impose restriction on their access to common resource and mobility. These problems actually severely affect their ability to live a life of dignity and safety. Though communities usually strive to overturn these issues with whatever available resources and avenues they have, but the lack of public knowledge of relevant legal and project information hinders their ability to uphold their rights and attain meaningful remedies or relief from these adverse situations. Next slide, please. In this background, actually, CPR Namati Environmental Justice Program developed a strong network of paralegals to pursue environmental justice using a legal empowerment approach. Who are these paralegals? Actually, these are community resource persons who are equipped with knowledge of basic law, relevant regulatory institutions, administrative processes, and skills such as mediation, training, and community organization. They work directly with the affected communities to help them understand their situation from the lens of legal regulatory framework. And mind you, these communities have been living with these impacts for so many years that they are almost normalized to these impacts. So the paralegals kind of help them to see the legality, the illegality of these problems around their neighborhood. Next slide, please. Actually, the paralegals use this methodology of ground truthing, whereby they help communities to first understand the law, then situate their problem as a violation of these regulations, build legit evidences like our friends actually shared the photographic evidences, geomapping and stuff like that. Using those tools, they build legit evidences about the impacts, and then using this approach, using this information, they approach the relevant regulatory bodies and seek practical remedies to their problems. This systematic legal evidence-based system to push for environmental compliance puts legal empowerment as its central approach, where paralegals, whereby our paralegals help communities to know the law, use the law, and eventually, with the course of time, gain agency and capacities to shape the law. Next slide. So far, success stories. So far, we have worked over 250 instances of industrial non-compliance across the country. And in many of these cases, communities were living with the impacts for more than 5 to 10 years. And out of these, we have been able to achieve end of violation in almost 164 cases. And these instances include whereby a farming community in Odisha was able to cultivate their land after 20 long years because the mining site in their neighborhood was releasing toxic waste, rendering the land uncultivable. Or let's say a community in Gujarat, finally getting relief from not breathing day in, day out bauxite dust because a bauxite storage unit was situated next to their colony, and there were non-compliances on the site. So the instances are many, over here you can see so many before and after pictures, like how compliance led to lead a cleaner environment. Next slide. Along with cleaner environment, this approach has also been able to bring communities and regulatory institutions much more closer. In most of our cases, before the paralegal approached communities, they were not even aware of the basic of the relevant regulatory body or the law they could have used to approach or get relief. So in our cases now, the communities not only approach the relevant body but are also able to participate in the regulatory efforts. So many of our community partners are able to participate in the monitoring efforts of the regulatory bodies, and through this participation, we are able to help the regulatory officials not see these non-compliances as a mere technical glitch or a mere technical slip. Rather, we are able to help them understand the social and economic impacts of non-compliance on the lives of people. And this understanding thereby inform the entire process of remedial action, entire process of planning the remedial action for the people. Next slide. So lastly, what do we aim? We aim to build a constituency of a legally empowered community in our country who have the knowledge and the agency to participate in environmental decision making in this country. And not only this, we want to also demonstrate the value of having this legally empowered community to ensure that our environmental governance system becomes more robust and more inclusive in the process. I guess I'll just stop right there and happy to take questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Media. That was a really, I think, important presentation. And I think it would be interesting to really talk about the complementary nature and the differences between the Stripe approach and the legal empowerment approach advocated by CPR and Namadi.
Yeah.
Finally,
just wanted to mention that I forgot. These are some quotes from our community partners directly who have been working with this approach and how they kind of see the value of this approach and how it has kind of helped them address the power imbalance to a certain extent. So just wanted to mention that.
No, thank you. I think that's important to hear directly from the people in the community. Great. So let's move on to Alejandra with a slightly different perspective as a funder. So thank you very much. Take it away.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, WRI and the Access Initiative for inviting me today. It's great to be in the company of amazing and inspiring fellow panelists. Thank you. Good day and good evening, everyone. Next slide, please. American Jewish World Service is a public foundation that supports grassroots organizations and social movements in the defense of human rights in 19 countries through 4 programs: civil and political rights, sexual health and rights, humanitarian response, and land, water, and climate justice, which brings me to the case I will share with you today. Next slide, please. Guatemala is a country with roughly 15 million people, and almost half of them self-identify as indigenous. In Guatemala, AJWS seeks to support groups who are still seeking justice from crimes of the past, but also those whose territories and livelihoods continue to be under threat by mega projects imposed on them. During the 36-year-long internal armed conflict, the victims, who were primarily indigenous peoples, were subjected to extreme violence, persecution, forced displacement, and genocide. Things have not changed. Last year, land defenders were the most targeted and killed group in the country. Next slide, please. Izabal is the largest lake in Guatemala. It's located on the top right corner of the country, pretty much isolated from the capital city and from the economic center of the country. It is used by fisher folk and the domestic tourism industry as an economic resource. In 2009, Solvay, a Swiss-Russian mining company, bought the nickel mine El Phoenix, already in operation, and proceeded to expand its production. This has resulted in rapid deforestation, dust on crops, increased traffic with trucks running over people recklessly, sometimes killing them, and furnaces pumping out smoke 7 days a week, very similar to the examples and impacts mentioned by my previous fellow panelists. Workers have died in refinery explosions, biology students have died under mysterious circumstances in the mine perimeter, and many local families report skin rashes in children. Next slide, please. The mining company and the local government have a tight relationship where they protect each other, treating local critics of the mine as criminals. In March of 2017, a red stain spread across the lake and the local communities blamed the mining refinery. The fisherfolk union organized since they had been losing fish stock in recent years, and they protested outside the mine where they were attacked by security forces. Carlos Mas, who is not pictured here, was a fisherman who was shot and killed during the protest. The people you see on the slide are Kekchi farmers and rural public school teachers who have been criminalized for speaking up against the social and environmental violations committed by Solway and Izaba Lake. By criminalization, we refer to the actions by police authorities where charges are made up as a way to detain critics and silence them while their trials are purposely delayed. Some of the people in this slide are still serving time because they refuse to admit culpability. Next slide, please. Mayan journalist Carlos Choc has been documenting the activities and violations committed by Solway in the Phoenix mine at a very high personal cost. He was there when Carlos Mas was killed by security forces, and he photographed the incident. He was then accused of holding company staff captive during the incident, and he was detained and is currently out on parole. Since then, his house has been robbed and his equipment has been taken. He continues to receive death threats and verbal attacks to this day. Next slide, please. In February of this year, Guatemala Supreme Court ruled that local communities had not been properly consulted when the Phoenix license was renewed in 2006 under the previous owners. Solway is appealing the verdict. If the decision is upheld, it will have to undertake a consultation process. We recognize that the defense of the territory needs a holistic approach. At AJWS, we support Prensa Comunitaria, or Community Press, the alternative media organization where Carlos is part of, as well as the human rights law firm that has taken on the many cases of the fisherfolk and farmers impacted by pollution. We also value and support the organizations that work at the intersection of defense of the territory, historical memory, and political prisoners, as is the case of Festivales Solidarios, or Solidarity Festivals, who were the ones who designed the poster in this slide and the one with the environmental defenders. They design clever social media campaigns and prioritize a collective healing of communities through art and music. I wish I could leave you with more concrete victories, but the closing of civic space and attacks on the press by many current leaders worldwide make it all the more important to continue to tell these stories for the world to know. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alejandro, for that important presentation. We didn't talk about it in the presentations before, but I think that some of our strike partners have also experienced threats and intimidation. And we also had one partner in Thailand that actually was killed under suspicious circumstances. This is a huge issue, and I think a really important part of thinking about how land and environmental defenders can protect themselves while they continue their advocacy. And again, I hope it's an important question that I hope that we can get to when we move to the discussion portion of the presentation. Great. So with that, I would like to invite John Knox to take the stage. John is going to try to sort of weave the presentations together by thinking about how this all impacts environmental human rights. Great. John, over to you.
All right, thank you, Liz. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with everyone else today. These presentations show both the scope of the harm that local communities face as a result of these environmental threats, and also the resilience and commitment that local communities employ in addressing these threats. I saw this throughout my time as the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment, including in my last year, a trip to Mongolia 3 years ago, where I met Chimge and many other Mongolian activists. And these presentations show how capable and engaged civil society in Mongolia and all of the other countries are. But indigenous peoples, local communities, and civil society can only engage, they can only affect policymaking if states comply with their obligations to respect and protect their rights, including their rights to information, participation, and remedy. And that's the problem, of course. States often, maybe even usually, fail to do that. Even when they have strong laws in the books, they fail to comply with them and they fail to enforce them against corporations to protect local communities from environmental harm. And it's important to realize that this is not just a matter of good practice. It's a question of human rights. Everyone, everywhere has the human right to information about environmental issues, including how decisions may affect them. Everyone, everywhere has the right to participate in environmental decision-making. That includes the right to speak freely and without concern about detention or other unlawful consequences, even when, or especially when, they're criticizing their government. And everyone has the right to remedies for violations of these other rights. Why is a human rights approach so important? I think there's three basic reasons. One is that framing these issues in terms of human rights helps to clarify what's at stake. The right to live in an environment that supports the full enjoyment of all rights, including rights to life and health. The right, in other words, to live a life of dignity, equality, and freedom. The second benefit is that it provides clear rules. As Liz said, in my last year as Special Rapporteur, I presented framework principles on human rights and the environment that tried to sum up and summarize everything that human rights law requires governments to do in the course of environmental protection. And those rules are quite detailed and specific in many areas, including on information, participation, and remedy, but also with respect to protection of environmental defenders, non-discrimination, and obligations to protect those who are most at risk. The third benefit is that it can open up new forums, new courts, international bodies. As we heard from our Mongolian colleagues, for example, the National Human Rights Commission there has gotten involved in some of these issues. That's increasingly a trend around the world. So how can we amplify the voice of local communities, local civil society organizations on these issues? All of the participants today show exactly how you do that. You work with them on the ground, and that's why this STRIPE initiative is so important. It provides a way, it provides another tool to help improve the awareness and capacity of local communities to understand how they can exercise their environmental rights to fight against environmental harm. As Margareta says, it can't substitute for working directly with local communities to find out what their priorities and concerns are. Nothing substitutes for that. But this provides a methodology for helping to do that. And as Vidya said, a systematic, legal evidence-based approach is exactly what communities need to help them push for compliance and eventually help to shape the law. So I want to thank the participants for kind of illustrating both the ways in which they are already working to protect the environment and the ways in which they could use additional support to help them achieve their priorities and goals. As Alejandra said, environmental defenders are often at enormous risk of harassment, violence, and even death. Guatemala is particularly of concern, but this is a problem really in many, many countries all over the world. And I think it's necessary for all of us to do all that we can to work together to support those who are on the front lines of environmental protection. They are true human rights defenders as well as environmental defenders because they're working to protect others' human rights as well as their own. And this STRIPE initiative is one important way to help them do just that. Thanks again.
Great, John. Thank you so much for those kind words. Now we're going to move to a complete panel discussion. So if everybody could make sure that their camera is on and their mic is unmuted. And then I would like to introduce you to Carol Excel. Carol is the director of the Environmental Democracy Project at the World Resources Institute and also the director of the Access Initiative. She's an environmental lawyer with over 15 years of experience working on human rights, including the right to access information, participation, and justice. She's going to be moderating the panel discussion. So take it away, Carol.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. I hope you can hear me. Yes, great. Thank you everyone for those very enriched and important presentations of the work that you have been doing at the local level for so many years to push for accountability from corporations as well as from governments. I think they were even eye-revealing for me, and I think it's important for us to recognize the length of many of the struggles that you've been involved with at the local community level. I want to just start off with a question which I think hopefully I could get a sense of a response, maybe from Indonesia and in India, about your sense of how these tools have worked in terms of long-standing pollution, and how do you think you can raise greater awareness of these issues, you know, at the national and international level? I mean, what are the tools that are really needed to make sure that, you know, government and corporations act on some of the issues that you have raised? You know, how can you break through? Is there a need to tie it to issues of climate change? How can you get more attention to pollution? It's often seen as the, you know, the sister child to some of the more important issues. People say like climate change or biodiversity protection as a brown issue. So if you two can reflect on that question, that would be great.
Sure.
Maybe Queena, you could start.
Already. Sorry for taking on that. Yeah, thank you so much for the really thoughtful question, Carol. I totally relate with the difficulty in working with old, long-standing pollution. And one of my favorite part about Strive is it is super methodological. All the probing questions about what informations you need to get in order to get a better picture, a clearer picture about what is going on. For example, who are the point sources? How many point sources are there along the rivers? And how is the enforcement has been done? And what are the previous sanctions? For example, all of those probing questions are really important because it just allow us to build a more complete set of facts, even that the local community might have their own perception of things. That's one of the thing about long-standing pollution, and they might have their own distrust with the legal institutions and their own perception about how the law has been working in favor of whom. So it's really important to rebuild that kind of set of facts and allow the story to not only kind of like being retold to these people and allow them to have a fresher perception about the event, but also to the wider community who might be also impacted. So yeah, this tool allows bringing that to the wider group. It helps you to define the scope of, redefine the scope of this advocacy. And the other issue that you raised, we didn't see that in Hyojung case, but we saw that in another river case, which to me is really compelling. The way to bring it to the bigger scope is by tailoring it to the end users, the people who get the advantages of the pollution. And in Citarum case, these are textile, fast fashion buyers all across the other hemisphere. So the pollution event in the Citarum case, by spotlighting the pollution, how bad it's there, by collecting the information about who the polluters are, how bad the river condition is there any consideration about the pollution load, why a permit is being issued and renewed over and over again despite the river condition. It really allows the people across the globe to see, oh, so this is the supply chain of what I'm wearing. And it really helps the buyer to help acting, to help giving pressure to the polluters to really act on their pollution, and also the government. So that's actually one of the 2 cents that maybe hopefully be useful for seeing
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much, Queen, for that answer. I'm going to go to Vidya. Can you respond to that?
Yeah, I guess in India, when we started our program, the first challenge was to make people see the illegality. You know, for us, the economic narrative has been put in such a state, in such a way that environmental impacts are often seen as a collateral for development, for pursuing development, and mostly the development agenda is seen as a mutually exclusive priority from the environmental protection, which should not be the case. So our for us, it was a very it took a lot of patience and a lot of time to kind of get the communities visualize the illegality, see how their rights, from the like John said that from the framework of human rights, how their rights are being violated. So it was a huge process, and definitely having that systematic approach helped us to kind of infuse both the legal aspect from litigation strategy, and also the people community organizing strategy from the protest as a popular strategy. So it was like combining best of both the worlds into this approach. I think for India, I guess emphasizing on why non-compliance is an issue is no more a challenge, because like 7 out of most polluted cities, 7 out of 10 most polluted cities across the world are in India. We are regularly faring as one. I mean, recently the Yale Environmental Performance Index, we scored like 177 out of 180. Like out of 441 river stretches, 245 are critically polluted. Now it's like officially stated that it's critically polluted. Delhi, how the air is. Like globally, it's known to be smoke chamber. So I guess the whole point of how non-compliance is leading to environmental issues and pollution, I think people have started making this this semblance, this relationship of how all these things are interrelated. Now, to ensure that we are able to push the government, yes, definitely the need is to kind of establish this clear relationship between non-compliance and climate change, which is definitely also the value of environmental justice and climate change. I mean, of late, I think climate change has taken a very macro view, and it doesn't really talk about these localized experience of communities. And I guess there is a need to definitely draw this clear relationship between these problems, which are actually quite interrelated. Secondly, our approach has been to also advocate that non-compliance is not only a drain on natural resources. It is also a drain on the economic resources. It is also a drain on the resources of the projects in the long run. Because in India, there are, with the rising instances of non-compliance, you're seeing so many litigations happening in the court. Be it at the green tribunals or the Supreme Courts, their projects are being heavily fined, and this is where we need to demonstrate that complying to the regulations would make much more economic sense for the businesses to actually stay profitable in the long run. So I guess these two major arguments of how we get corporates to see the value in being compliant to the environmental regulations from the business point of view. And second, definitely holding our own governments accountable, that they can't stay non-compliant to the regulations domestically while they sign multilateral agreements like Paris agreements and stuff like that, and stay non-compliant at the domestic front. So I guess these two could be the major approaches, at least in our context, to push for a better case in point. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I want to turn to some of our advocates from Mongolia, particularly Shimge and Bayerma. I want to hear from you a little bit more about how coalition building is so critical to addressing these types of pollution issues, to bring it to the kind of the national attention, and how did you develop coalitions around some of these mining issues? Because there's so much mining going on in Mongolia of so many different types. Were you able to find commonalities and common advocacy approaches using this tool or others? If you could just reflect for a couple of minutes about coalition building, that would be really helpful. Chimge or Bayerma, who would like to take that question?
Yeah, who will start? Bayerma and Bayra, would you like to start? Okay, so I'll try to start. I found the importance of the STRIPE methodology is like really to building like demand side of the accountability. It's not the like teaching what to do, teaching local communities not to do, but instead of it's like strengthening the capacity, building the capacity at the local level to fight for their rights. So even after the project, even without the like national NGOs like OSF, the communities become able to stand up for their rights. This is the importance of the STRIPE methodology I found. But even if the communities are mobilized themselves as an NGO, like having a petition and meeting with the government agencies, demanding a justice, it's very difficult, it still be very difficult to, for them to make their voices heard at the national level, like how to systematically resolve the problem they face. So that we found the like networking of the national level NGOs and to the local communities is very important. As a result of the STRIPE project in Mongolia, like 6 communities we covered by this project, there are around like 8 local community initiated NGOs have been established. So in order to inspire them to continuously like continue their fight against injustice, we invite them to become a member to the National NGO Civil Society Coalition Publish What You Pay. The Publish What You Pay is like one of the leading NGO network working for the better governance of the extractive sector in Mongolia. We have around like 40 member organizations. And then we have also like part of the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative National Council, which is the main body to make like transparency and governance related decision in the extractive sector with the like equal participation of all sides, government, industry, and then civil society. So making a part of this locally initiated NGOs to the national level coalition, we are making them able to continue learning from the sharing the experience from the national and local level. And then also like sometimes we invite the local NGOs to present their problems, what they are seeing, the way to resolve these problems. We invite them to present at the national level, like discussions. So with the collaboration with the Publish What You Pay, these local NGOs are now started doing a litigation, public interest litigation at the administrative court, like challenging whoever guilty before them. So this is, you know, I found that the importance of the network of building between the local and national level civil society initiatives. Thank you. Bayra and Bayerma, if you would like to add into this, please.
I will give them a chance to speak. I don't know, Bayerma, you're on mute if you want to, or Bad, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Одоо нэгдсэн мэт те. За. Байна уу? Байна уу? Одоо. За. анх биднийг 2010
Initially, 2014, when we started implementing Stripe in the mining areas, the local communities, indigenous people, were not enough organized to voice out their concerns. They didn't know the laws. They didn't know how to protect their rights. And 5 NGOs were based on the will of the community. And the 5 NGOs decided to be one voice, one community voice, representing 5 different communities. And that was quite resultful and effective, and it's been seen by the community. The indigenous people have seen that getting together is a powerful step forward. Also, we worked with journalists and the media. Working with 1 or 2 journalists was not sufficient because it's a very corrupt country. There are groups, mining, government mixed groups, and in which the police would be protecting. So we have organized a network of journalists, investigative journalists, that has helped the cause a lot. Through the support of journalists, our work was highlighted in the media. As soon as this happened, the communities who are in the same situation, they would address us, asking us for ideas, methodologies, and experiences, asking us, how do you fight? How do you have the licenses banned? How do you restore environmental justice? How do you ensure protection of human rights? So that's the way we are transferring the methodologies to other communities. The social society network is one of the strongest tools of environmental rights protection and human rights protection. And through networking, we understood that it's very important that network can make the government pass right decisions and fix the problems. And
Thank you so much.
Most important by the local communities.
Thank you so much for those words. They're very inspiring about how, so even new NGOs were formed in Mongolia to allow communities to discuss together and find solutions and share strategies. I want to leave some time for some of the questions in the Q&A, and I really encourage people to put questions in the Q&A for our panelists, because I want to hear your thoughts. One of the first questions is actually a question about Jamaica and what has been a brief overview of the issues there and engagement of the Stripe model there. Yes, we did do I can answer that myself because I was in charge of implementing Stripe in Jamaica with our partners, the Jamaica Environmental Trust. It was very interesting when you hear the stories from Mongolia and India and Indonesia to realize that these problems are global, and we really even named the webinar around the global fight against pollution and the use of these rights, because it was completely mirrored some of the same issues that you had spoken about here. And the communities that we were working with, which Jet worked with primarily, were in Clarendon and St. Thomas. And they did a project similar to what was mentioned in these other cases, the impacts of mining, in this case, both bauxite mining and quarrying on these communities, issues to deal with health and asthma, issues to do with pollution of water. And similarly, the methodology was introduced to communities. JET really focused on monitoring of the environmental pollution, in addition to collecting information from government about enforcement and breach of standards. Also looking at developing a local toolkit called Stand Up for Your Rights to teach mining affected communities how to use their rights, environmental rights, effectively. And they were also looking, as did other Stripe partners, at trying to get policy change. In this case, looking at the environmental impact assessment regulations in Jamaica, trying to ensure that there could be more mandatory requirements for participation on both quarrying and mining sites, advocating for changes there, and also advocating for changes to ensure that local communities could get non-technical information near to the local communities rather than in the capital, Kingston, at a free and available cost, so that they could negotiate and deal with that power imbalance that happens between companies, governments, and local communities. So very similar issues that I think you heard were raised by all the panelists here. I wanted to also maybe bring up another question that I see in the chat. To the panelists, there is a question about how do you gain trust of people who aren't necessarily the biggest fans of Americans, and assistance might come down as being paternalistic. Liz, I'm going to turn that question over to you to respond. I mean, what was the experience? And if our panelists, other panelists, want to talk about their experience engaging with us as well, you're open to do that as well. We want to be very transparent. Liz?
Thanks. I have two thoughts on that question. It's a great question. The first is, I think we just need to start by recognizing that pollution is not, we talk about the impacts being disproportionate in low income and middle income countries, but ask anybody who lives in Cancer Alley in Louisiana, in Flint, Michigan, where they had lead in their water, in the low income and people of color neighborhoods in New York City, they're going to tell you that they really are experiencing the same kind of marginalization and discrimination. And American groups have really taken, I think, an incredible leap in really defining these pollution issues as a form of environmental racism. So I think that one of the first things I do as an American when I am talking to groups that might not be thrilled with our policies is to, number one, let them know that America is a large country and that we have many of the same problems, and we have millions of people that are just as concerned in trying to fight for change in this country as we are in others. Secondly, when you're working at the local level, no matter where you are, I think it needs to go back to who is in charge. And I think that we, and especially as a privileged American, I was always very conscious that my role was a supportive role. We provided funding and training, but really allowed the community and our civil society partners to define what the problem was and define what the outcomes and goals that they want to achieve. And it was really my role and the role of the Stripe Project to facilitate their ability to achieve those goals, and also, like this webinar, to help bring their messages to the national and the global scale, and use the sort of access and privilege that we have at the World Resources Institute to continue to really elevate these questions and these important issues. So I think that is my sort of answer. I would really, I think, would love to hear from Alejandra as well about this, and how you sort of identify and focus on which communities you're going to work with, and how you as sort of an outside funder are able to come in and support them.
Absolutely. Thanks, Liz. So at HAWS, we have 4-year programmatic strategies that are developed with the accompaniment of the partners that we've been supporting for a long time. The average number of years that AJWS supports partners is around 9 years. So we recognize this is a long-term approach, that we cannot expect changes to happen overnight, especially in the context of indigenous peoples who see this as a very long term. We cannot get distracted by current administrations, and they say we've been fighting for this for 528 years. For more, for less, is not going to make a big difference as long as we keep on looking at the long term of where we want it, how we want to get there. When we develop these strategies, we envision the future we want and who are the organizations fighting for that change. That's how we go about building change. And so it's not at a specific grantee level, but what's the ecosystem, what's the integrated approach to achieve this change. So that's why we, in the case of Guatemala, in a very particular example of defense of the territory, is the communities, it's the coalition building of organizations that support these communities, it's the legal defense, it's the people, the organizations that bring information in an accessible way to semi-literate communities. It's the use of art and theater to use different types of approaches to our body and brains to engage in different ways, not just in a way that as Westerners we've been used to coming in with a PowerPoint presentation. So it's using, making use of all of the different types of factors and tools available.
Thank you very much, Alejandra. There's one more question in the chat that I want to get to, but before, maybe I would love a reflection from you, John, about some of the questions around defenders that Alejandra actually brought up in her presentation. There's so many advocates, as was mentioned by the panelists, who work on pollution, who are at threat, threatened, stigmatized, harassed, criminalized. In your work, John, where do you see, glimmers of hope in addressing this issue of attacks and threats against environmental and land defenders?
John, I believe you're still on mute.
Can you try?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Really saw the threats facing environmental defenders as not part of some kind of global problem, but rather a series of kind of unrelated events. And so I remember going to countries and hearing the same thing from governments, which is that, well, this person, I'm sorry, can you not?
No, I can
you not hear me? Oh, okay.
I can hear you.
Okay. So I think that's one thing that has really changed, is that people are around recognizing that these problems
Turn off interpretation, John, because I think there are some people that can't hear you. Thank you.
Turn off interpretation. Okay. I think I have it on original audio both, so I put it in English. Is that the problem?
Hey, John, if you're just in English, I think you're all set. Liz, I think that you may be in a different one, but John, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. All right. Well, so what I was saying is just I think through the work of how there are consistent patterns affecting environmental defenders around the world, and then did a great job of publicizing that. I think the threats facing environmental defenders are now understood much more clearly. That doesn't mean that solves all the problems by any means, but at least it means that there's more focus and attention on it. Last year, I went to Frontline Defenders, the Human Rights Defenders organization. I went to their biannual platform, the Dublin platform, and they highlighted the threats to environmental defenders. So what you know, in terms of glimmers of hope, what kind of hopes are there? I do think more attention to the problem is maybe the single biggest positive development I've seen. That means that more organizations are working on it, and there's more networking across countries from different organizations working together to highlight these issues. But I want to be clear about this. This is still an ongoing threat. There's no real decline in the number of environmental defenders that are being detained, threatened, and killed. We just don't see those numbers. So, you know, it's, in my view, it's one of the biggest problems that environmental protection faces around the world, because if you can't protect environmental defenders, then all the other things we're talking about are impossible.
Thank you very much for that, John. And with that comment, with that glimmer of hope, I'm going to pass it back over to Elizabeth, maybe to wrap up, and maybe in your wrap up, Liz, you could try and address the last question that you see in the chat. But from me, I just want to say how grateful I am and privileged I feel to have been working with all of you, all the panelists on the Stripe project for the last 6 years or 7 years in some cases. And thank you so much for spending the time to share your thoughts and ideas with us and answer so clearly the questions we gave you. Liz?
Yep. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate you spending the last hour and a half with us and joining us for what I think is really just a fundamentally critical conversation that we need to have over and over again. To briefly address the last question, which is really about the fact that we need to come up with different business models that don't generate the amount of pollution, I think this is a really important point. Often the problem is not technical, that there are pollution control strategies that can reduce the pollution. And as we talked about, you know, compliance and enforcement of laws is a huge issue. And so for many of these countries, if they just followed the laws in their country, there would be less pollution. But ultimately, I do think we need to think about circular economy, zero toxics and pollution prevention technologies that really will eliminate the use and creation of pollution as the fundamental solution. And really the urgency around climate change, the fact that we need to ultimately get to a zero carbon economy, hopefully is not just a terrible threat to humanity, but is hopefully an opportunity for innovation, and that the urgency to innovate and make those changes will happen. With that, I again want to thank our wonderful panel for all of their insights and their dedication to work, including Noman, our interpreter for Mongolian. It's been my pleasure and my privilege to moderate and to work with all of you, and I wish you the best of the rest of your day and evening. Thank you very much for joining us. Bye-bye.